Camera placement is really important no matter the price or size of the lights you use, because if you aren't placing your camera relative to where your light is, this can be the reason why you're not satisfied with what you capture or why it's not like what you see on the big screen. Misplacing the camera can lead to your images falling flat with no depth or character, and is the quickest way to not make it in filmmaking. The solution to this is to shoot on the shadow side of your subject. This is also known as backlighting or upstage lighting, and it is when you put the subject in between your camera and light. Whether it's a person or an object you're focusing on, putting your camera on the opposite plane of your light already helps to create the look and feel we see in movies. Once you realize this, you'll constantly notice it in what you watch. Putting your subject on the same side or plane as your light is what makes the image look flat with no depth to it. Doesn't matter what type of light source you are using or techniques, this is what every cinematographer usually looks to do in their work. Like adding foreground elements to your composition, shooting the shadow side also makes the frame pop, adding a 3D element to it. Sometimes we do see broad lighting being used in cinema, but most shots are from the shadow side. Good camera placement also helps to create patterns of light and dark across your frame, which further adds to the depth you want in your image for that cinematic look many of you like to call it. As you see in these examples, the patterns of light and dark in the image have more character than that flat lighting. Since you now understand where you should place your camera in relation to the light, you can experiment with different light sources you can use. With any of these light sources I talk about, you still want to place the camera as best as possible to achieve that movie look. Out of your budget, the most popular source of light anyone can use is the sun, which is also commonly known as natural light. Everyone has the sun available to them outdoors. It might differ in the amount you have coming into the interiors, but this is the first source I consider when I'm filming. If you want the light to be soft or not so harsh as it is during most of the day, you'll want to stick to shooting during sunrise or sunset. Or another time of day to shoot, which is actually my favorite, is blue hour. This is either right before sunrise or right after sunset. For 20 to 30 minutes, there's still enough light outside, and the world is just covered in this shade of blue, making everything cooler and more flattering to shoot in. I really could go on about it. Now you can decide to shoot at any time during the day and get softer results, but that would take more equipment or mean limiting your locations to shoot in the shade. There are silk scrims that are amazing at diffusing the harsh sunlight, but not everyone can just go out and spend that much on a diffuser, especially if you're new to this. So that's why you can get a cheap 5-in-1 reflector and it should get similar results. This way you can get softer light at almost any time of day when you need to get your filming done. With this, you can also bounce more light into your subject or even take away light to increase the shadows with the other reflectors. Or you can decide to embrace the harsh light, as that brings a look to your image that can still be film-like, as not all light is soft in cinema. The best way to start figuring out what artificial light you might need is by introducing practical lights into your frame. And what is the most common practical light used? Lamps. Practical lighting is simply using actual light sources within your frame. Examples of this include TVs, computers, flashlights, candles, street lamps, signs, car headlights, and many more. These practical lights can help illuminate your subjects more if needed, or make it easier to add artificial light to your scene to enhance the lighting in frame, which is also known as motivated light. The light sources you use, whether it's natural or practical, might not be strong enough to properly expose your scene, or be too strong where it's overexposed in your frame, so you use artificial light to enhance these other sources and get proper exposure, but in a way that creates a convincing world that makes sense. You don't want a lamp in your frame here to then put artificial light on the opposite side to brighten up your scene. You want the additional light to look as if it's coming from the lamp so the audience thinks it's coming from the lamp. This is the same with natural light. If the sunlight entering the frame isn't strong enough, you can add artificial light to make the natural light seem brighter than it actually is, or to increase the ambient lighting in the space you're working in. There are many options for artificial light, you just need to experiment to find the right light for the use case. The important thing to take away here is the placement of your light also needs to make sense with your environment so the audience isn't left wondering where the light is coming from. The most common and traditional technique used is the 3-point lighting technique. Here, you place your light sources in 3 distinct positions in relation to your subject. You use a key light as the primary and brightest source of light, a fill light to fill in the shadows to bring back any details needed, and a backlight, also known as a rim or hair light, that illuminates the back part of your subject. I think it's self-explanatory, and you see this constantly used to achieve those patterns of light and dark across your frame to get that cinematic look. After the 3-point technique, there's also the 4-point lighting technique where the 4th light source illuminates the background itself. A standard and widely significant lighting style is Rembrandt lighting, also seen a lot in photography and paintings as it was created in the 17th century. Now this is done with just one light source and can stick out more visually with harsh light, but can be achieved with softer light too. All you have to do to achieve this look is have your light source up and above your subject and angle it from one side at around 45 to 60 degrees. On the shadow side of their face, you should see a triangle form and create the Rembrandt lighting look. You can also let the darker parts of the image just fall into the shadows instead of adding a fill light to make it more dramatic. Another popular and simple lighting technique is simply backlighting your subject. Putting your light source opposite of your camera with your subject in between creates a moody feel to the image. You can push this look even more by deciding to have the front of your subject fall completely to dark to create a silhouette that is constantly used in movies. Here are some more lighting techniques you always see used. Top-down lighting or top lighting, where the light is directly above your subject. High-key lighting. There's less contrast and very minimal shadows in the image, and it is the very opposite of low-key lighting, where the contrast is higher and usually with harsher shadows in the scene.
All right, so we're gonna try to shoot a window scene right here in front of this window. And what I've done is put a variable ND filter on the camera here. We're gonna stop down and expose for the window and then try to get enough light inside here with the small rig to fill it out and not have me completely silhouetted. So here's how it would look exposing for the interior, but that window is obviously completely blown out. So we're gonna turn down our ISO and we're going to turn our variable ND until we get a decent exposure outside the windows. Here's how a shot might look with no lighting. Now let's turn on the 120B, blast the ceiling. Woo. Now we've got the 120B aimed at the ceiling, filling it out enough so that I'm not silhouetted in front of that window. Now maybe we'll use this practical here just to separate me a little bit. This is a Philips Hue light, so we can just turn it on and set the color temperature to be daylight. Now let's take one more look. And just this simple setup with the one small rig light and the little practical light is already looking pretty decent, but I have a feeling if I'm able to reflect some sunlight from outside the window onto my face, that's gonna be a very strong key light and make my face just pop in the frame much better. So let's give that a shot. Now, like I said, I don't have a lot of grip or lighting gear, but what I do have is a mirror that's adjustable. So we're gonna put this right outside the window here and try to reflect direct sunlight onto my face as our key light. And now we just need to do some final adjustments here. All right, so now we have the issue that it's actually too bright, this key light. So we need to diffuse this mirror light somehow. I'm thinking if I put some foliage in front of it, it'll not only look more natural, but it will dim the light, cutting it significantly. I don't mind if there's some little hot patches on my face, but we don't want a big block of blinding light like this. So let's see what we can do. Let's just take some weeds here. Just blocking out the light like that. Okay, let's take a look now. All right, feeling pretty good about this lighting setup so far. I just think I need a rim light to bring out the back of my head separated from this darker background. So I got this little Moman LED light, battery powered, and I'll be connecting it to this iPhone mount thing with like a flexible arm. There's my mirror reflector, looking good. Practical, got a arm mount rim light. Got the small rig light bouncing off the ceiling and the camera right there. Sun keeps moving, so I keep having to reframe the camera, but that is pretty good. Okay, final shot. Closer, final shot. So now the question is, can I take a wide shot like this and make it look halfway decent with this light and whatever else I have? First off, we got too much open window here. So let's just use the curtains and cut that down a little bit and see what happens if maybe we point this up at the ceiling again. That does fill out the room, kind of some high key lighting, you know, a little bit more of a commercial style, but I think the problem is now that it feels like the lighting is coming more from here, and I want it to feel like the windows are motivating my key light. We need this key light coming from this side of me, and I want it to be soft. And we've already done the bouncing off the ceiling thing, so we're gonna try something a little different. One of the easiest ways you can use this RC120B light and get some really soft light, even without a softbox that you can buy separately, is to create this thing called a book light, which is what I'm doing here. I hung my reflector up on the curtain rod since I don't have a C-stand, and I'm bouncing the SmallRig light off of that, and then the bounce light is going through my shower curtain, which I've taped up here, and it's basically double softening the light. And this is called a book light, and it's a great way to get some really soft spread of light over your subject, even if you don't have a lot of gear or budget to work with. And now I'm getting this really soft key light being directed at the couch from the direction of the windows. Okay, and then I closed that curtain some, shaped it up a little bit, just to get rid of that overblown background through the window there. Now the book light's coming through and it looks pretty natural to me, not bad. Here's a comparison of with the book light and then without. And you can see how much flatter and duller the image is with the 120B turned off. All right, so we did some daytime stuff. Now I want to try a nighttime setup and go for something that's a little more stylized. So let's see if I can pull it off right here in the office. All right, so I think first I'll just start with these cheapo desk lights. Don't really need either of them. They're not going to give me the best light for this. So I'm going to replace this one with my softbox LED panel. And boom, we got a softbox light, pretty bright on my face. Might want to tone this down a little bit. One thing I don't like is that if we're going to be blowing moonlight through here, I probably want this to be cooler. So I wonder if I use one of these filters on this as well. That looks maybe too blue. That's crazy town. I don't know. We'll play with it. I'm going to move on to the SmallRig light outside. It's looking pretty good, but it's definitely blasting the entire office with bright white lights. So we're going to try to channel that light into a more precise area. But since I don't really have the right tools to do that, I'm going to use my leftover roll of black wrap to make a little funnel around this and try to get more of a spotlight effect from this thing. So here we go. So I just did a little grip tape to wrap this black wrap around this light and channel it into a more tight light pattern on the wall in there. It's still a little too loose for me. It's kind of filling out the entire room, but fortunately, we've got my blackout curtains that we can use as a flag to block out some of this light and get it to look a little nicer. So let's see what that does. That looks pretty good. And we haven't put the blue filter on, so I'm gonna put that out there. We'll see where we're at. I think it'll stay. All right, it's looking cooler. I'm still thinking that this light is way too warm, so I'm gonna use my other blue filter on this. So I did say lighting on a budget, right? I only have one more blue filter, so I had to put a purple over here to cover the rest of this softbox, but you know what? You can't really tell. So I'm gonna make it as bright as I can. Now, if we get a warm color, back here is my rim light, and that will kind of mimic what this light is doing. So we're gonna fake that that is my rim light here. So we have the practical there, and then we have the on-camera light hooked up to the door and this flexible iPhone arm. That's bi-color, fortunately, so I said it's the warmest color. Now what I'm just thinking is if I can break up this light that's on the back wall, it might look a little bit more realistic. So I ripped off a little shrub, and I'm gonna try to put this in front of the light to make it look like that moonlight is filtering through some foliage. I got the light here, and then I've literally just gaff taped this stick to the inside of the window, and you know what? It's doing a pretty good job. Okay, so I've brightened the SmallRig light to 75%, but I've also lowered the ISO on the camera to darken the image. The problem I'm running into trying to balance all these lights is that this key light right here with the softbox on is so weak. Even though it's 3 feet away from my face, it's barely getting enough light on my face to expose me properly as a key light. So I think I'm gonna have to take the softbox off this thing, which means the light's not gonna be quite as flattering, but it might give me enough brightness to work as a stronger key light. All right, this is with the softbox off, and now I think we're actually starting to get somewhere. A few more things, and I think we'll be good to go. So without the softbox, this light is a little harsh, so I'm gonna throw a little strip of just plain old wax paper in front of it, and I think that'll soften it without cutting too much light. Okay, I've made a few more little tweaks, and I'm feeling pretty good about it, so now it's time to hit them with the fog. All right, And as you can see, I've gone absolutely crazy with fog in here, but that's giving us a much softer, more diffuse light. And this is going to be our final lighting setup. And I think it actually looks pretty cool. Looks like it's straight out of a sci-fi film.
The robots are self-aware.
Indeed.
The love robots. Do they know?
Let's take a look at the first shot, the nighttime bed scene. It's a very simple setup where I had the Godox with the reflector attached, pointing at an angle to a white wall. That wall was serving as a bounce to create a soft light that could resemble the moonlight. But there was a little issue with only bouncing the light off the wall. Because the room is white, I don't want it to bounce everywhere. That's why I have this blanket and a bounce board there to create a dark side on my face, so that I'm keeping a bit of contrast there. The dark blanket and the black bounce are serving as negative fill. That means these two dark surfaces are actually removing light from one side of my face, as opposed to regular fill, which adds light to a subject. Regular fill, or simply fill, could be a white wall or any other white surface, and I'll show you some examples of that further in the video. But first, why do you think I wanted to remove light? Well, if we look at the same scene without the negative fill, you can tell the lighting is very even and flat. This makes for a less interesting looking shot. By adding negative fill, the light becomes more directional and helps sell the effect that it could be moonlight shining through a window. It also adds contrast to the shot by creating a dark side and a light side to the character. Another thing that helps convey the nighttime effect is the blue color grade. A warmer color grade turns the same shot into more of a morning shot. And that brings me to the second shot, which is the morning shot. But instead of changing the color grade, I wanted to create the effect that morning light was shining through the blinds onto the character's face. A great way to achieve this is by using a spotlight and a gobo, but these tend to be quite expensive. An alternative and much more affordable way to pull off this look is by using a mirror. First, I used some cinefoil to ensure that the Godox light was directed straight at the mirror, avoiding any unwanted spill on the wall. This effectively created a spotlight. For this setup, I was again using some negative fill on one side of my face to create a bit more contrast. In the next setup, the character is in the kitchen, quite dramatically backlit by the morning sun. Here I placed the Godox outside, pointing at an angle towards the window. I made sure that the light was at a height where it could mimic the morning sun, and positioned it in a way that the light would sort of peek past the kitchen cupboard in the background. Since it was quite bright outside, I had to set the Godox at 100%, and that did a pretty good job at resembling the sunlight. But there are a few other things that play a big part in making this shot work, so let's start from scratch and build this setup step by step. This is what the scene looks like with normal daylight and the blinds up. There's not much atmosphere in this shot, there's too much hard light coming through the windows, and the camera side of the character is too dark. So let's start by closing the blinds a bit. This will reduce the very harsh sunlight. However, now the whole scene is much darker and the character is almost completely in shadow. I added a white bounce to reflect the light coming from the window and the Godox. This helped with filling in or adding light to the shadow side of the character. If we now take a look at the addition of the fill combined with the Godox blasting through the blinds, we get something like this, which looks a lot better than what we started off with. But there's even more we can do to make this shot extra atmospheric, and it's this right here, a little bit of haze in a can. This works especially well with backlit scenes, as it can create these rays of light. Just have a look at the shot without the haze, and then after adding in the haze. Shot number 4 is again a very simple one to achieve. It's great to create a dramatic look for a dark or scary or mysterious character. Having a really bright side of the face and a really dark side of the face puts a lot of mystery around the character. The important thing here is to put the light at an angle towards your subject, because that's what will create that sharp contrast. I mounted barn doors on the Godox light, allowing me to direct the light towards the face and limiting any light spilling onto the walls behind me. If we look at the same shot but without the barn doors attached, you can tell there's a lot of light spilling on the wall behind me and also on the shadow side of my face. This makes the shot a lot less moody and dark. I also used a white bounce, again to fill in a bit of the shadow side of my face so that it's not completely underexposed. An important thing to note is that the character is positioned by the window. Now, why do you think that is important? Your brain automatically connects the light on the character to the light from the window. If the window wasn't there, it would feel less natural. So the light on the character is now motivated. It has a reason for being there. Similar to the previous shot, this next setup is another simple way to create a moody looking shot, but with a softer light. The technique I'm using here is referred to as reverse key lighting or upstage lighting. Have a look at the setup, and if you don't know already, see if you can figure out why this is called reverse key lighting. As you can tell, the Godox is not placed in front of me, but instead placed more behind me. So it is lighting me slightly from the back and the side. In a more classic lighting setup, the key light would mostly come from in front of the subject. However, in reverse key lighting, the light is placed slightly behind the subject. This is another technique that you will see being used in a lot of films, and it produces a lot of mood in a shot. I'm using a softbox to ensure the light hitting my face is not too hard. If you don't have a softbox, you can use a white blanket or a tablecloth and put that in front of your light, and that will help to soften it up. And again, I'm using a white bounce to fill in the shadow side. And that white bounce is very important to change the mood of this shot. You can see as I'm moving the bounce, it creates less or more darker shadows, making the shot less or more moody and dark. In this shot, the character is actually being lit from below, but by a light coming from the top. Let me explain that. The Godox is almost pointing straight down onto the table. That table is reflecting the light or bouncing the light onto the character's face. It creates quite harsh and dark shadows around the eyes, and this tends to result in a dark and sinister look. You'll see this in movies when they portray bad guys or scary characters. So the first shot here is the Godox with the reflector dish mounted, pointing at the table and bouncing the light back onto my face. And you can tell that it's not the best looking shot, especially not for the look that I'm going for. One thing is that the light is spilling everywhere, so it's not very controlled, just pointing at the table. So the first thing I did was put on the barn doors so that I can reduce that light spilling. And this is what that looks like. So with the barn doors attached and the light bouncing off the table. Now, as you can see, this is a wooden table, so the light bouncing off this table is going to be quite warm. If you don't want that and you want a neutral bounce, you can put a white material on the table, like a white bounce board or a blanket. That will make sure that the bounce light is not that warm or orangey. If you want to go for an even darker look, you can change the white bounce material with a dark bounce material like this blanket. That is going to reduce the light reflecting and create a much darker shot. And we can even go a different route by controlling that top light even more. For example, by attaching some cinefoil and creating more of a spotlight towards the table. This way we will have even less light spilling. And this works really well to have kind of a character appear out of the dark and reveal himself slightly into the light. Depending on either a black or white bounce, the shot will become more or less dark and dramatic. Another great way to create interesting looking shots is by making use of practical lights. And you'll see this very often in films because it tends to create a sense of realism in a scene. It helps sell the illusion that what we are seeing on screen is not an artificial set with artificial lights. A practical light is any light source that is visible in the scene. So in this shot, the practicals are these two lamps. The purpose of these lights is to motivate the light that is in fact lighting the subject. Because in most cases, as you can see here, the practical light itself is not strong enough to actually light the subject. The first thing I tried was setting up the Godox out of frame behind me and pointing at a gold reflector. This is what that looked like. Not too bad, but a few things I was unhappy with. One is that the light is slightly too harsh. And the second is that it's not warm enough to match the practical light. So I moved the Godox to the side where the practical light is and mounted the softbox. Even though right now the light was much softer, this light was much too cold and didn't look natural at all. After all, we wanted to create the effect that the character is being lit by the lamp. So I got some orange foil and placed it inside the softbox in front of the light, which worked quite well to warm up the light. I won't say that this is perfect, and ideally you would use a bicolored light like the Godox SL60 Mark II Bi, where you can just dial in the correct light temperature. However, now the shot is looking pretty good, but because there is a white wall on the shadow side of the character, it's actually filling in that side too much. So I decided to add some negative fill on that side to create more contrast, and I think the result looks much better. One last thing I want to mention about this setup is the second practical in the background. That one helps to separate the subject from the background and also serves as a bit of a fill light for that background. Without it, the shot loses depth and it doesn't feel very complete.
If we take a look at this shot right here from Barbie, it's meant to be a daytime exterior scene. And in this scene, there's a top light outlining her, but there's a ton of fill light on her face, causing a really flat yet balanced look. And it gives it this really clean, polished look that feels almost too perfect. But that's very intentional because in this scene, they're in Barbie world where everything is meant to be perfect. Now, if you cut to this daytime exterior scene, you'll notice that there's a lot more depth and shadow on her face. And that's because this is real life. It's not Barbie world anymore. So what they probably did is add a ton of negative fill over here to create that sense of realism in this scene. And it's little subtle decisions like that that really help give your cinematography life and purpose for the film. Having the contrast between something that feels really flat and perfect versus something that feels a little bit more real and contrasty really tells that visual story in the lighting. One lighting technique that every Hollywood film uses is a technique called backlighting. This is that edge light that falls off the back of a person or object, and it's what many of us associate with the cinematic look. You can see in this one shot from Looper that both actors are outlined in this really strong backlighting that's supposed to represent a very natural golden hour look. But what they're probably doing is punching a few hard tungsten lights through this back window here to create this effect. And if you take a look at this scene from Babylon, the cinematographer chose the perfect time of day to get this side lighting in this shot right here and this perfectly backlit shot during the sunset. Now, these are all examples of how you could add light to your scenes, but there's also another really important factor, and that's how you subtract and control the light in your scene. A very common way to do this is by adding something called negative fill. And basically, negative fill is made from a piece of black fabric, and its purpose is to absorb the light in a room. And what this does is create shadow to your image in a very controlled way. Now, when you look at something that's front lit, it looks very flat, but when you start to add a little bit of shadow, now your image starts to have dimension and depth. And taking a look at this shot from Interstellar, you can see our main light source that feels like window lighting is coming from this direction. And you could also see that there's a bit of rim light or backlighting happening over here. But there's actually some very intentional shadow and contrast on this side of Matthew's face. And that's a strong indication that there is some sort of negative fill here. And even though this scene looks very natural, great cinematographers have a way of tricking your eyes to believing that the lighting is motivated by a very natural source, when in fact there's actually nothing natural about this. And that's where the next key component of lighting comes into play, something called motivated lighting. Motivated lighting is a technique where you imitate or accentuate existing light sources to enhance the lighting in your scene. For example, let's take this scene from Dune. Now, if you see here, they show you this wide shot of the room that have these massive windows spilling light naturally all over the room. So when they cut to this close-up shot of good old Timmy over here, your mind automatically believes that this light is coming from these windows back here. But it's definitely not, because if you come back to this wide shot, you can obviously see that he's pretty dark and the lighting on his face is completely different. So in order to properly light the scene, you can definitely tell that they added some soft light over here to shape his face and properly expose him. But to us, the audience, this looks really natural because it's motivated by the windows behind him. And lighting can also be motivated by practical lights in your frame, like lamps or bulbs. Taking a look at this shot from the Joker, you can see that there's some practical lights in the background, and as the viewer, we believe that that's what's causing this cyan lighting on his face. And then you see this warmer orange looking light on the other side of his face, which is motivated by the outside street lamps. And as the audience, we believe it because they show us this shot of the window, and we assume that that lighting is coming from the outside street lamps. But this lighting on his face isn't coming from these lights in the frame. They're definitely coming from lights outside of the frame, but to us, the viewer, this feels like it's very natural, and those lamps and the street lights outside are causing these two different lights on his face. And that's how great cinematographers can really trick your eyes into believing that this is a very natural look. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about today is color. There's a lot of ways that you can use color in your film. You could use it in your lighting, but you could also use color in your set design and wardrobe. Color is a great way to create depth and contrast, or even represent a tone or feeling for your scene. Taking a look at this shot from John Wick, the cinematographer used color to create contrast separation between the actor and the background. By using this cool blue light on Keanu's face and having him against these red lights in the background, they're using complementary colors to create contrast and visual interest. And complementary colors are colors opposite of each other on the color wheel. And using complementary colors aren't the only way to use color schemes in your film. You could also go for a more monochromatic look like this shot in Blade Runner. And you could even use vibrant colors for the clothes that your actors are wearing, like this shot from La La Land. They're using this yellow dress to separate her and create depth from the background.